Hi, my name is Paul Blackburn, and I'm a realtor with Ad Properties here in Chicago. So basically, it's time to rent out your home, and this is what this slide is going to be about. We're going to talk about renting out your home or condo and the steps that you want to take in order to ensure that you get an excellent tenant. Many people right now are considering renting out their home because the rental market is doing so well in comparison to the sales market. However, they're concerned about getting somebody into their unit that's going to pay on time, that's going to take care of it, that's going to treat it like they would. So we're going to go over some basic steps on how you can do that, whether you utilize a realtor like myself or whether you do it on your own. So some of the first basic steps you're going to take is going to be an application. You're going to have them fill out an application that's going to give you a basic synopsis of who they are and give you the ability to also run credit and other background checks. So the one thing you're going to want to do is going to do a credit check. A credit check is going to be pretty simple, pretty basic. It's going to give you a score. You always want to pull a credit report that gives you a score, so a FICO score. Really, we consider anything above 700 to be a good and acceptable score. You're going to want to do employment verification as well as income verification. Many people forget to do the income verification. They believe that just because they have proof of employment that's satisfactory. It's not. You want to make sure that their income coincides with their application so that they can actually afford the place that they're renting. Excuse me. Background check. A lot of people do not do background checks, and it's something that we do at Properties on a pretty routine basis. I always recommend to all my clients that we conduct background checks for prospective tenants. You will be able to get a full criminal background check, not just in this state, but across all 50 states and in all counties. An eviction check. If you get evicted from a rental property, many times it will not appear on your credit report. It only does so basically if the landlord decides to go ahead and to report you to the credit bureaus and report the debt, or if they get issued a judgment. Many times this is not the case. So with that being said, we want to run an eviction check, and what this does is it checks county records across the board to see if an eviction has been filed against the applicant. And then we're also going to talk very briefly about doing a properly constructed lease, as well as talk about the responsibilities that you now have as a landlord. So the application you see on the screen in front of you is the application that we use at Ad Properties. The first arrow is pointing to some of the basic information on the application. This is going to be driver's license number, social security, full name and address information for the applicant. The next is going to be a little line a lot of people forget on their applications, and that's going to be about pets. In Chicago, we are a very, very pet-friendly city. Not all landlords, however, want dogs or cats in their property. What you want to know is if the applicant has any dogs or cats or plans to get any dogs and cats. That's why we put this on the application. You want to know this up front. Next is landlord information. This is going to be for the current landlord for your applicant. They're going to put down their landlord information so you can go ahead and call and follow up and ask some basic questions such as, has the person always paid their rent? Have they ever been late on their rent? Would you rent to them again? Keep in mind, landlords are under no obligation whatsoever to provide you with information, but this is just a nice way to make you feel comfortable. One thing to keep in mind is that many renters right now also may own their own properties. They may be in the same position as you and cannot sell their property, so they're renting theirs out, and in turn they're going to be renting another property that perhaps fits their needs better. So if this is the case, they're just going to put down the application that they own their own property. Get proof of this. Either have your realtor look it up online to make sure they are the owners of the property, or just ask for a mortgage statement. Very, very simple. Next will be employer information. This will give you some basic information such as what they do for a living, the information that you can go ahead and then utilize to contact their employer to confirm employment and salary. As well as just to basically just give you a quick synopsis of who they are. So before running anything, you can quickly take a look and see if they make enough to afford your property. Credit check. So basically, what is a good credit score, right? We always talk about someone having good credit, but what is good credit? Really, anything 700 or above is acceptable. 680 or above is acceptable as well. You will run into some certain situations where somebody may have poor credit due to certain circumstances. What I always say is always be open and open to talking to your applicant about it, but make sure your applicant is always honest from the start. If your applicant comes to you and doesn't mention anything about bad credit, credit and then you run it and find out the credit is bad, they're trying to pull one over on you, maybe hoping you weren't going to run the credit. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I just had a divorce, here's my situation, here's why my credit is this way, then maybe you can work with them if you feel comfortable enough. What else should you be looking for? In a credit report, what you want to make sure is you want to make sure that everything is current. You want to make sure they actually do have some debt, make sure they do have some credit cards that they're using, and you want to make sure that the current payments that they've been making have been made on time. You don't want to see a recent trend of late payments or missed payments. What if the credit is bad? We basically just talked about that. It's something that you can take on a case-by-case basis. I'm not going to go too much into detail about it now, but if you have somebody with bad credit and you don't feel comfortable, you always have the right to refuse them. What if one applicant has good credit and the other one doesn't? So let's say you have a boyfriend-girlfriend moving in together, right? And one has excellent credit, great income. The other has good income, but bad credit. What you want to do is look at the person with great credit and see if they could afford the place on their own. If they could afford the place on their own without any problems or difficulties, this means that they do not need to rely on the other applicant for the rent. So if this is the case, you can maybe just do the lease in one person's name or do the lease in both people's names, but with the understanding that you know that the qualifications of one person is sufficient enough to pay the rent that you are asking. You can always ask for a co-signer as well. What do I do if I reject the tenant based on credit? We have a law here that you have to follow. So if you do reject a tenant based on bad credit, you have to provide them with a denial letter stating why you denied them, and it's going to be based on their credit. And you also have to give them a free source of where they can go to obtain a free credit report. All realtor agencies out there, such as Ad Properties, we all have these forms that we can easily, quickly produce if needed and hand out to the applicant. Employment verification. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can get an employment letter, and this is a letter from the employer basically stating that they're employed. These are most common when you see somebody being transferred for the first time and they have a new job, and they're going to give you their acceptance letter or their job letter, if you will. You can always get pay stubs. Great thing about pay stubs is it's going to confirm employment as well as confirm income. Phone call to the employer is always fine, and you can also email the employer. If you're emailing the employer, you want to make sure the email address is direct with the company and not an email address at Gmail or Yahoo or something of that source. And if you make a phone call, you want to make sure you're not calling a cell phone. You're going to want to make sure maybe you're calling a main line and to the company, and then asking to be transferred to the person who will be able to verify the information. Income verification. We already talked about pay stubs. That's probably the best way and what I always recommend. If someone's self-employed, you can always ask for tax returns. Very popular for doctors, lawyers, people in that type of a profession. Bank account information is always great too. Sometimes people do not have pay stubs, or they're on a voluntary basis with the pay stubs, so they just have an automatic deposit into their account. If this is the case, basically have them print up a recent bank statement showing at least 2 direct deposits from their employer. Make sure the statement is dated as well. In the letters from employers stating income, this is always done in cases where the person has not started their job yet, they have a new job, or they're being transferred. In this case, just make sure that that letter that you're getting is direct from the company, make sure it's dated, make sure it's signed as well. Background check. You really need to know who's living in your place, and the main reason is not because you want to check up on them for their moral fiber or judge them for the things that they've done. You want to do this because you want to protect your income stream. If you have somebody who is a murderer or a child molester or whatever in your space, one, you're probably not going to feel comfortable with that. But two, when it comes to actual money, and we're talking about money coming into your bank account here, if they're going to jail, they're not going to be able to work to pay their rent. So that's why we want to do the background check. We want to make sure that they are going to be able to pay the rent and that they're not going to have to worry about going to jail or worrying about other problems like their attorney bills. So you want to make sure that you have somebody in there who is going to be basically an all-around upstanding citizen. Eviction check. Talk briefly about this. What this does is this does checks across all 50 states and all counties, because like I said, a lot of times an eviction will not show up in somebody's credit report. Most of the time, obviously, people who get evicted usually have bad credit. However, you never know. So we want to, again, cover all of our bases. We do the eviction check. The last thing that you want to be doing is going to have to go ahead and file eviction paperwork. You do not want to do that. It takes way too long to evict. In the city of Chicago, actually in Cook County, the sheriff does not evict during certain times of the year. They don't evict during certain holidays. They do not evict if it is below freezing outside, which during our winters is pretty much the majority of the time. A proper lease. It's very, very important that you draw up a proper lease. Leases with errors delay the eviction process. For instance, if you were to write on a lease Sheridan Avenue as opposed to the correct street name, which is Sheridan Road, you would not get your eviction order. The sheriff would not evict. You might get a judgment one against you for back rent, but the sheriff won't evict unless the address is 100% accurate. Make sure you know that. Leases with errors can make you responsible for fines, even if the tenant is not paying rent. If you go to evict your tenant, and your tenant is halfway good at avoiding paying for things, they're going to hire an attorney to help get them out of this eviction process. This attorney is going to look for any error in the lease possible. Right now, the most common error that's happening in the city of Chicago with the new ordinance that was passed is the stating of which bank the security deposit is being held, along with the address of a branch location on the front of the lease. Right now, landlords must place on the front of all leases the address and the name of the bank where the security deposit is being held. Now, if you use Bank of America, a large bank like that, you just put Bank of America and then you put a branch location. Make sure it's on the front of the lease. If you don't, you can be liable at a bare minimum for 2 times the amount of the security deposit. That's a lot of money. Don't want to screw that up. Riders on a lease must be filled out properly. Many times we use riders and leases to basically specify or to nail down certain items that you don't want your tenant to do. Things such as smoking in the property, painting the property, things like that. There's certain ways riders need to be constructed. In a different video, I'll go over a properly constructed lease along with properly constructed riders. But for right now, know that there's certain procedures that need to be followed. Doing it in good faith is not good enough. And security deposit receipts also must be given at the time of receiving the security deposit, and keep in mind your security deposit must be deposited within 24 hours of receiving it. What are you responsible for? Again, we're going to do a different video that's going to go into much more detail about this, but what I want you to get from this video is that in Chicago, know that you are much more responsible. You're responsible for much more than you think. Just leave it at that. There is something called the Chicago Tenant and Landlord Ordinance. Download it offline, read it, understand it well, understand how to handle security deposits. If someone's looking to rip you off by living in your place and not paying rent, I guarantee you they know the ordinance inside and out. You have to know it too. And always consult an attorney with any questions you may have. Here's a free resource for you. The City of Chicago does offer a great deal of information online. You can learn about the tenant ordinance at the following website at the bottom of the screen or the middle of the screen, www.chicityclerk.com/tenants-versus-landlords.php. You can also always email me. My email address is paul@pkblackburn.com. You can visit my website, www.pkblackburn.com, to get my direct contact information as well, or my blog, which is the chicagorealtyblog.com. Whether you utilize somebody like myself who's been doing this for a while and has a great deal of experience working with developments, leasing developments, and working with private condo owners, make sure that you work with somebody who does have experience in leasing. Whether they're a realtor or a leasing agent, make sure you have somebody with at least a couple of years' experience in the business who understands the procedures inside and out and the tenant-landlord ordinance inside and out.